Montana Territory, 1878. Vance Thornton stood at the altar of St. Michael's Church in Silver Creek, Montana, his heart hammering beneath his pressed Sunday vest as 300 pairs of eyes burned into his back. The organ wheezed through the opening bars of the wedding march for the third time, and still no bride appeared through those heavy oak doors. "Maybe she's just nervous," Reverend Phillips whispered, though his weathered face told a different story. Vance adjusted his string tie, the collar suddenly too tight around his throat. At 25, he'd survived cattle stampedes, winter blizzards that froze men solid in their saddles, and a Sioux arrow that had grazed his ribs 2 years back. But nothing had prepared him for this gnawing uncertainty as the minutes stretched like taffy. Then came the sound of boots on the church steps. Heavy boots, male boots. Vance's best man and fellow ranch hand, Samuel Reed, tensed beside him as Caroline's father, Josiah Montgomery, pushed through the doors alone. The banker's face was crimson, his jowls trembling with what could only be rage or humiliation. "She's gone," Josiah announced to the assembled crowd, his voice cracking. "Left a note. Said she couldn't marry a man who loved his ranch more than he could ever love her." The words hit Vance like a fist to the gut. Murmurs rippled through the congregation, a wave of shock and scandalous delight. Mrs. Henderson actually gasped loud enough to echo off the rafters. "Vance, I'm sorry," Josiah continued, approaching the altar with heavy steps. "I thought she was ready. I thought you were what she wanted." What she wanted. The phrase lodged in Vance's mind like a splinter. He'd proposed to Caroline Montgomery because it made sense. She was the banker's daughter, educated back east, refined and proper. Marrying her would secure the loan extension he needed for the Thornton Ranch, would give him the respectability his father had died trying to achieve. Love hadn't entered into the calculation much at all. That was the problem, wasn't it? Vance had learned early that the frontier was no place for soft feelings. His mother had loved his father desperately, and when a range war claimed his life, she'd withered like a flower in a drought. Vance had been 12 when she followed his father to the grave, killed by what the doctor called a broken heart, but what Vance knew was simply weakness. Love made you vulnerable. Love made you forget that survival was all that mattered in this harsh land. So he'd built his life around the ranch, around proving that he could make the Thornton name mean something. At 25, he ran 2,000 head of cattle across some of the best grazing land in Montana. He'd done it alone, without needing anyone, without letting emotions cloud his judgment. Until he'd needed capital, and Josiah Montgomery had made it clear that family ties would make that loan extension a certainty. "I'll make this right," Josiah said quietly, though his eyes couldn't meet Vance's. "The loan will work something out." But Vance wasn't listening anymore. He was already pulling off his suit jacket, his face burning as he pushed past the banker and strode down the aisle. The crowd parted like he was Moses at the Red Sea, everyone too shocked or too entertained to speak. Outside, the September sun was unforgiving, matching his mood perfectly. Samuel caught up with him at the hitching post where Vance's bay gelding, Ranger, waited patiently. "Want me to find her?" Samuel offered. "Maybe she just needs someone to talk sense into her." "No," Vance swung into the saddle, not bothering with the stirrup. "She made her choice clear enough." "What are you going to do?" "What I should have been doing all along, focusing on the ranch. This was a fool's errand from the start." He rode out of Silver Creek at a gallop, not caring that half the town was watching from the church steps, their Sunday best forgotten in favor of the scandal unfolding before them. Let them talk. He'd been the subject of gossip before, would be again. This was the frontier. Today's humiliation was tomorrow's forgotten news. The Thornton Ranch sat 15 miles northeast of town, a sprawling operation that Vance's grandfather had carved from wilderness and his father had defended with blood. Vance had spent the last 7 years since his father's death building it into something more than a mere survival operation. His herd was quality stock, his men were loyal, and his land was prime territory, and it was all he had. All he'd ever need. The belief settled over him like armor as he rode, hardening with each mile. Caroline had been right about one thing. He loved the ranch more than he could ever love a person, because the ranch wouldn't abandon him. It wouldn't die and leave him hollow. It would endure as long as he was willing to fight for it. By the time he reached the ranch house, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. The house was modest, 2 stories of solid timber with a wraparound porch his mother had insisted on. She'd said every home needed a place to watch the sunset. Vance hadn't sat on that porch in 7 years. He was unsaddling Ranger when he heard the wagon approaching. Not the usual supply wagon, but something lighter, a buckboard moving fast. Samuel appeared from the bunkhouse, his face grim. "Boss, we got a situation." "What now?" "The Simmons place. Fire took the barn and part of the house last night. Lightning strike, from what I heard. The widow's got nowhere to go with winter coming." Vance paused, his hands still on the saddle. Margaret Simmons was a good woman who'd lost her husband to pneumonia 2 winters back. She'd been struggling to keep her small homestead running with just her daughter to help. They hurt. "No, but they're camping in what's left of the house. Doc Miller sent word, hoping we might have space in the bunkhouse or the old line shack." Vance's jaw tightened. The bunkhouse was for his men and the line shack was barely weatherproof, but he couldn't leave a widow and her daughter homeless with Montana winter approaching. "Tell them they can use the guest room upstairs, my mother's old room. Until they figure something else out." Samuel's eyebrows rose. "You sure that room hasn't been opened in years?" "Then it's time to open it." 3 days later, Margaret Simmons arrived with a wagon full of salvaged belongings, and a daughter Vance hadn't seen in nearly 5 years. He remembered Flora Simmons as a gangly 15-year-old with dirt on her face and an attitude that could sour milk. The young woman who climbed down from that wagon was something else entirely. Flora Simmons was 20 now, and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with Caroline Montgomery's practiced refinement. Her hair was golden blonde, pulled back in a practical braid that hung past her shoulders, with loose strands escaping around a face that was sun-kissed and expressive. She wore a simple calico dress in pale blue, worn but clean, and boots that had seen hard work. Her eyes were the color of a summer sky, sharp and assessing as they took in the ranch. "Mr. Thornton," Margaret said, approaching with her daughter. "I can't thank you enough for taking us in. Flora and I will earn our keep. I promise you won't regret this kindness." Vance nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "The room's ready. Samuel will help with your things." Flora's gaze met his directly, without the demure downward glance most young women affected. "We heard about your wedding. I'm sorry it didn't work out." Her mother shot her a horrified look. "Flora, that's none of our business." "It's all right, Mrs. Simmons," Vance said, though Flora's directness had caught him off guard. "It's no secret. Whole town knows by now." "Still," Flora continued, "Caroline Montgomery never struck me as the ranching type. You might have dodged a bullet there." "Flora Simmons," Margaret's face went red, "you apologize right now." But Vance found himself fighting a smile for the first time in days. There was something refreshing about Flora's honesty, even if it was inappropriate. "No harm done. Miss Simmons has a point." Flora offered a small smile in return, then followed her mother toward the house, carrying a battered trunk that looked too heavy for her frame. Before Vance could think better of it, he was taking the trunk from her hands. "I can manage," she protested. "I know you can, but you don't have to." Something flickered in her eyes, surprise maybe, before she stepped back and let him carry it inside. That night Vance found himself unable to sleep. The house felt different with other people in it, alive in a way it hadn't been since his mother's death. He could hear Margaret and Flora moving around upstairs, their soft voices carrying through the floorboards as they settled in. He made coffee in the dark kitchen, standing by the window and watching moonlight silver the pastures. This wasn't permanent. Margaret would find somewhere else to go, would rebuild or move in with relatives back east. The women would be gone by Christmas and his life would return to its proper order. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it felt strangely hollow. Can't sleep either. Vance turned to find Flora in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl over her nightgown, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. In the lamplight she looked younger than 20, vulnerable in a way that made him suddenly aware of how alone they were. "Coffee's fresh," he said, focusing on practical matters. "Cups in the cabinet." She poured herself one and joined him by the window. "It's beautiful here. I'd forgotten how big the Thornton ranch was." "Your father's place was nice too." Was being the key word. She sipped her coffee, her expression darkening. "Lightning doesn't care about nice. Neither does drought or disease or any of the 100 things that can destroy everything you've built out here." That's the frontier, nothing's guaranteed. No, she agreed. It isn't. They stood in silence for a moment, two people who understood the harsh realities of Montana life without needing to pretty them up with optimistic words. My mother cried herself to sleep tonight, Flora said finally. Not from sadness, from relief. She's been terrified since the fire, trying to figure out how we'd survive. Your kindness means more than you know. It's just a room. It's more than that, and you know it. She turned to face him directly. You could have turned us away. Plenty would have, especially after what happened at your wedding. You had every excuse to focus on your own troubles. Vance shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Your father was a good man. He helped my family when we needed it. I'm returning the favor. Still, thank you. Her gratitude was simple and genuine, without the flowery declarations Caroline would have made. Something about Flora Simmons was different from any woman he'd known. She understood this life, understood that survival came before sentiment, that the frontier demanded strength over softness. And yet, standing in his kitchen with moonlight in her hair, she didn't seem hard at all. You should get some sleep, he said, more gruffly than he intended. Morning comes early around here. So I remember, she smiled and set down her cup. Good night, Mr. Thornton. Vance, just Vance. Vance then, and I'm Flora, not Miss Simmons. After she left, Vance stood in the dark kitchen for a long time, telling himself that the warmth in his chest was just the coffee, nothing more. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm that surprised Vance with its ease. Margaret proved invaluable in managing the household, cooking meals for the ranch hands that had the men singing her praises. But it was Flora who caught Vance off guard at every turn. She woke before dawn, same as the men, and appeared in the barn ready to work. When Vance tried to assign her easier tasks, she fixed him with those sky-blue eyes and informed him that she'd been running her mother's homestead for 2 years and knew her way around cattle better than most of his hired hands. She wasn't exaggerating. Flora could rope a calf, mend fence, and handle a horse with the kind of easy competence that came from years of hard experience. She worked alongside the men without complaint, and by the end of the first week, even Samuel was impressed. That girl's got sand, he told Vance as they watched Flora help break a young Mustang to saddle. More than most men I've known. Vance couldn't disagree. Flora sat that bucking horse like she was born in the saddle, her face set with determination as the animal tried to throw her. When she finally got him calmed and walking in circles, she was grinning like she'd won the lottery. See, she called to Vance, he just needed someone patient. Or someone too stubborn to give up, Vance called back, but he was grinning too. That night, Margaret insisted on a proper dinner at the house instead of the usual bunkhouse fare. She'd made roast venison with potatoes and carrots, with an apple pie that smelled like heaven. This is too much, Vance protested as she set a plate before him that could feed 2 men. You don't need to do all this. Nonsense, you've given us a home when we had nowhere else to turn. It's the least we can do, Margaret smiled warmly. Besides, this house needs life in it again. Your mother would be glad to see it used properly. The mention of his mother created a moment of uncomfortable silence. Flora, seated across from Vance, watched him carefully. I remember your mother, she said softly. She came to visit once when I was little, brought me peppermints. She was kind. She was soft, Vance said before he could stop himself. The frontier isn't made for soft people. Margaret's expression shifted to something sad and knowing. Kindness isn't weakness, Vance. Sometimes it's the only thing that makes this hard life bearable. He didn't respond, focusing on his dinner instead, but he could feel Flora's eyes on him, could sense her seeing too much. After dinner, Margaret retired early, claiming exhaustion, though Vance suspected she was giving them privacy. Flora helped him carry dishes to the kitchen, working in companionable silence as they washed and dried. You don't talk about your family much, she observed, setting a clean plate on the stack. Not much to talk about, they're gone. But they shaped you, the way you run this ranch, the way you are with people. That comes from somewhere. Vance set down the pan he was washing, his jaw tight. What exactly are you asking? I'm not asking anything, I'm just noticing. She dried her hands on her apron, studying him with those too perceptive eyes. You work yourself like you're trying to prove something. Like if you just push hard enough, build enough, succeed enough, then it'll all mean something. That's what you do on the frontier. You work or you die. That's survival. What you're doing is different. You're punishing yourself. The words hit too close to something Vance didn't want to examine. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Flora moved closer, her voice gentle but unyielding. You blame your mother for loving your father too much, for letting grief kill her. You've decided that caring about anything except this ranch is weakness. That's why Caroline left, isn't it? Because you couldn't let yourself love her even when you tried. She left because she was spoiled and selfish, Vance snapped. No, she left because she saw the truth. That you'd already decided love was impossible before you even proposed. Flora's expression softened. That's a lonely way to live, Vance. It's a smart way to live. Out here, emotions get you killed. Or maybe they're what keep you alive. She touched his arm lightly, the contact sending unexpected warmth through him. My father loved my mother desperately. When he died, I watched her grieve so hard I thought she'd follow him. But she didn't, you know why? Because that love gave her strength. The memory of what they had, it pushed her to survive, to keep going for me. Love didn't make her weak, it made her fierce. Vance stared at her, this young woman who'd lost as much as he had but somehow hadn't turned bitter, hadn't built walls around her heart. How do you do it? Do what? Stay open, after everything you've lost. How do you still believe in any of this? Flora smiled, sad and sweet, because the alternative is becoming someone I don't want to be. Someone afraid of living because they're too focused on surviving. She left him alone in the kitchen, her words echoing in the silence. Vance stood there for a long time, feeling something crack in the armor he'd spent years building. October arrived with the first hints of winter, cold mornings and frost that sparkled on the grass like scattered diamonds. The ranch was preparing for the difficult months ahead, bringing cattle down from summer pastures, securing buildings against snow and ice. Flora worked tirelessly, her determination earning respect from every man on the ranch. But Vance noticed the shadows under her eyes, the way she sometimes winced when she thought no one was watching. She's worried, Margaret confided one evening when Flora was outside checking on a mare about to foal. About winter, about what comes next. We can't impose on your hospitality forever. You're not imposing. You're kind to say so, but Flora's too proud to accept charity. She's been talking about finding work in town, maybe at the hotel or the dress shop. The thought of Flora leaving created an unexpected tightness in Vance's chest. The ranch could use help, permanent help. Someone who knows cattle and isn't afraid of hard work. Margaret smiled knowingly. Is that right? I'm serious. She's better with horses than half my men, and the hands respect her. I could pay a fair wage, plus room and board for both of you. Vance, you know what people will say. An unmarried woman living on your ranch, it'll cause talk. Let them talk. I've been the subject of gossip before. And Flora. She's already had to deal with whispers since her father died, people suggesting all sorts of improper things because we're alone and struggling. I won't have her reputation damaged further. Vance hadn't considered that angle. In his mind, Flora was simply capable help, someone who understood ranch life and worked harder than men twice her size. But Margaret was right. The same town that had gleefully gossiped about his failed wedding would savage Flora's reputation if she stayed. Then we'll make it proper, he said before he fully thought it through. We'll get married. Margaret's eyes went wide. Vance Thornton, you can't be serious. But as he said it, the idea settled into place with surprising clarity. It made sense. Flora needed security and a home. He needed reliable help and someone who understood the demands of ranch life. It was practical, logical, exactly the kind of arrangement that kept emotions out of the equation. I'm completely serious. It would solve everything. Flora would have security, you'd have a permanent home, and I'd have a partner who actually understands this life. And what would Flora have to say about this remarkable proposal? They both turned to find Flora standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. How long have you been there? Margaret asked, flustered. Long enough to hear Vance offer me the most romantic proposal in Montana history. Flora's tone was dry, but her eyes were blazing. A business arrangement, how thrilling. Flora, it's not like that, Vance started. Isn't it? You need help, I need security, so we should marry. Forget about feelings or compatibility or any of that foolishness. Just practical frontier sense. What's wrong with practical? Nothing if you're buying cattle, Flora's voice rose, her calm facade cracking. But marriage is different, or it should be. Should it? Look around, Flora. Half the marriages out here are arrangements just like this. People partnering up to survive, to build something. At least we'd be honest about it. Honest about settling. Honest about giving up on anything more. She shook her head, her blonde braids swinging. I watched my parents love each other so deeply it hurt to see. I won't accept less just because it's practical. Your father's dead, Vance said bluntly. Your mother nearly followed him. That's what love gets you on the frontier. Flora flinched like he'd struck her. My father's death didn't diminish what they had, it made it more precious. Every moment they shared, every laugh and fight and quiet evening, it mattered because they chose each other. Not because it made sense, but because they couldn't imagine life any other way. That's a fantasy. No, Vance. Your belief that you have to face this life alone, that's the fantasy. Flora's voice softened, sadness replacing anger. You're so afraid of being hurt that you've locked yourself away. But you're not surviving, you're just slowly dying inside that prison you've built. She turned and walked out, letting the door close firmly behind her. Margaret sighed heavily. Well, that went splendidly. Vance slumped into a chair, feeling like he'd been trampled by his own stupidity. I was trying to help. I know, dear, but Flora's right. Marriage should be more than practical, especially for someone as young as she is. She deserves romance and passion, not just security. Romance and passion don't last. They don't survive drought and disease and range wars. Practical partnerships do. Margaret sat across from him, her expression gentle but firm. You really believe that what your parents had, what my husband and I had, that it was all just foolishness? I believe it makes you vulnerable. It does, but it also makes you stronger than you'd ever be alone. She reached across and patted his hand. You care about Flora. I've seen the way you watch her, the way you smile when she accomplishes something. You're already halfway to loving her, you're just too stubborn to admit it. I don't do love. That's not an ability, Vance, that's choice. And it's a choice that's making you miserable. After Margaret left, Vance sat alone in the gathering darkness, her words circling his mind like buzzards. He did care about Flora more than he wanted to admit. She'd become part of his daily life in ways he hadn't anticipated, and the thought of her leaving created an ache he didn't know how to name. But caring wasn't love. Caring was just practical appreciation for someone useful, someone compatible. Love was the dangerous thing, the weakness that could destroy you. He'd watched his mother waste away from love. He wouldn't make the same mistake. The next morning, Flora avoided him completely. She was up before dawn, working with the horses in the far pasture, and when Vance tried to approach, she found reasons to be elsewhere. It continued for 3 days, a cold war that left Vance frustrated and more unsettled than he cared to admit. On the 4th day, Samuel pulled him aside. Boss, we got a problem. What kind of problem? The Garrett brothers rode through this morning, asking questions about Miss Simmons, specifically asking if she was available for courting. Vance's hands clenched into fists. What did you tell them? Told them to mind their own business. But they'll be back, and you know those boys don't take no for an answer easy. Samuel's expression was troubled. Word spread that Flora's living here, and every single man in the county is going to come sniffing around. Some with honorable intentions, some not. The thought of men like the Garrett brothers, rough and crude, pursuing Flora made Vance's blood boil. She's under my protection. Anyone bothering her will answer to me. You planning to shoot every bachelor in Montana? Because that's what it'll take unless you make her situation clear. Samuel raised an eyebrow. Or unless she actually is available, in which case you got no claim to object. Vance wanted to argue but couldn't. Samuel was right. Flora wasn't his to protect, wasn't his anything. She was a guest in his home, nothing more, regardless of his ill-conceived proposal. That evening, Vance finally cornered Flora in the barn. She was grooming the mare who'd foaled the week before, her movements gentle and practiced. We need to talk, he said. I don't think we do. Flora, please just hear me out. She didn't stop working, but she didn't walk away either. Vance took that as permission. I'm sorry, the way I proposed it was callous, you deserved better. An apology for the delivery but not the content. How touching. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? She finally turned to face him, her blue eyes bright with emotion. You're not sorry for seeing marriage as a business transaction. You're sorry I didn't accept the terms. There's a difference. I'm trying to protect you. Men are going to start coming around and some of them won't be gentlemen. If we were married, you'd be safe. Safe but miserable. Trapped in a marriage with a man who won't let himself feel anything. She set down the grooming brush and moved closer. Vance, I know you've been hurt. I know losing your parents made you afraid to care about anyone. But hiding from love isn't strength, it's cowardice. The word hit like a slap. I've never been a coward in my life. Haven't you? You're brave about everything except this. You'll face down outlaws and blizzards and stampedes, but the thought of opening your heart terrifies you. Her voice broke slightly. I'm not asking you to propose out of love, Vance, but I can't marry someone who refuses to even try. What do you want from me? Honesty about what you feel, what you want. Not what's practical or logical, but what's true. Vance stared at her, this beautiful, frustrating woman who saw through every wall he'd built. The truth was complicated and terrifying, tangled up in years of grief and determination. I don't know how to do what you're asking, he admitted finally. I've spent so long keeping everything locked down, I'm not sure I remember how to be any other way. Flora's expression softened. Then maybe it's time to learn. She started to walk past him, but Vance caught her hand. The contact sent warmth racing up his arm, something electric and undeniable. Don't go. Not yet. Flora stopped, their hands still connected. Why not? Because I'm asking you to stay, not as an employee, not as a practical arrangement, but because I want you here. The words felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and freeing all at once. Because when I think about you leaving, something in my chest hurts. Because you make this house feel like a home again, and I didn't even realize it was missing until you arrived. Her eyes searched his face. That's a start. What else do you want? Time. I want time to see if this, whatever this is between us, could become something real. I want you to stop running from your own feelings long enough to figure out what you actually want, not just what makes sense. And if I can't, then I'll find somewhere else to go before winter, because I won't settle, Vance. Not even for security, not even for safety. I'd rather struggle alone than spend my life with someone who's only half there. She pulled her hand free gently and left him standing in the barn, her words echoing in the silence. The next 2 weeks were both torture and revelation for Vance. He found himself watching Flora constantly, noticing things he'd trained himself not to see. The way she laughed with genuine joy when one of the ranch hands told a terrible joke. The gentleness she showed with the animals, even the most difficult horses. The strength in her capable hands and the determination in her stride, but it was the small moments that undid him. Flora reading by lamplight in the evening, her face peaceful and absorbed. Flora teaching him a song her father used to sing while they worked side by side mending tack. Flora's hand on his arm, steadying herself as they navigated icy steps, her touch lingering just a moment longer than necessary. He was falling for her. The realization hit him one morning as he watched her in the corral, working with a young colt that had been too wild for anyone else to handle. She was patient and firm, understanding exactly what the animal needed, and when the colt finally calmed and nuzzled her shoulder, Flora's smile was radiant. Vance wanted to be the reason for that smile. He wanted to be the person she turned to, trusted, built a life with, not because it was practical, but because the thought of any other future felt empty. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like finally taking a deep breath after years of suffocating. That evening he found Flora on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the October cold, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold. My mother loved these sunsets, he said, joining her. She'd sit out here every evening, no matter how much work needed doing. My father used to tease her about it. Flora glanced at him in surprise. Vance rarely spoke about his parents. She'd tell him that beauty was just as important as productivity, that a person could work themselves to death and miss the whole point of living. Vance leaned against the railing, his eyes on the horizon. I thought she was impractical. Naive about how hard this life is. And now I think maybe I was the naive one. I thought if I just worked hard enough, proved myself strong enough, I could insulate myself from pain. But that's not strength, is it? That's just fear dressed up as determination. Flora moved closer, her shoulder nearly touching his. What changed? You did, watching you face everything you've lost and still stay open, still believe in love and beauty, and all the things I convinced myself were weaknesses. You're the strongest person I know, Flora, and you're right, I've been a coward. She turned to face him fully. Vance. Let me finish, please. He took her hands in his, feeling them tremble slightly. I don't know if I can be what you deserve. I don't know if I can learn to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you, but I want to try. Not because it's practical or because it solves our problems, but because the thought of you leaving would break something in me I didn't even know could still break. Tears gleamed in Flora's eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm falling in love with you, maybe already have fallen, I don't know, I'm terrible at this. He laughed shakily. But I know that when I wake up, the first thing I think about is seeing you. When something good happens on the ranch, you're who I want to tell. When I imagine the future, you're in it, always, and that scares the hell out of me, but not as much as losing you would. Flora's smile was tremulous and beautiful. That's the most wonderful thing anyone's ever said to me. Even though I'm terrible at it. Especially because you're terrible at it. Because it means you're being honest, not performing. She squeezed his hands. I'm falling in love with you too, Vance Thornton, have been for weeks, even though you've been stubborn and impossible. Just weeks. I've been impossible for years. She laughed, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Then she rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet, and Vance felt the last of his walls crumble. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, kissing her with all the emotion he'd kept locked away for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Vance rested his forehead against hers. I still don't know how to do this, how to love someone and not be terrified. Neither do I, we'll figure it out together, Flora smiled. That's what partnership means, not just surviving side by side, but actually living. Building something real. I like the sound of that. They stood together on the porch as the sun set, wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time in years, Vance felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The next weeks were a blur of happiness Vance had never expected to feel. He and Flora courted properly, or as properly as ranch life allowed. They rode out together to check fence lines, worked side by side in the barn, and spent evenings on the porch talking about everything and nothing. Samuel and the other hands noticed the change immediately. Vance caught himself smiling more, laughing at jokes, actually pausing to enjoy the sunset like his mother used to. Flora brought light into his life, yes, but more than that, she'd given him permission to feel again. Margaret watched it all with satisfaction, declaring to anyone who'd listened that she'd seen it coming from the start. Those two were meant for each other, she told Samuel over breakfast one morning. Just took them a while to realize it. But happiness on the frontier was always temporary. In late October, trouble arrived on horseback. Vance was in the barn when he heard raised voices from the yard. He emerged to find 3 men on horses, travel-worn and dusty. The leader was a tall man with a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. "Help you, Marshal," Vance called. "Looking for Vance Thornton." "You found him." The marshal dismounted, his expression grave. "Marshal William Hayes out of Wyoming, got some questions about a Flora Simmons, heard she's staying here." Vance's blood went cold. "What kind of questions?" "The kind related to a warrant." Hayes pulled a folded paper from his coat. "She's wanted for horse theft and assault in Cheyenne." "That's impossible. Flora's been here for nearly 2 months. This warrant's dated 8 months back. Says she stole 3 horses from a livery and attacked the owner when he tried to stop her." Flora appeared on the porch, her face pale but composed. Margaret stood behind her, clutching her daughter's shoulder. "That's a lie," Flora said clearly. "I've never stolen anything in my life." Hayes studied her. "Then why does Marcus Webb say you did? He's got witnesses." "Says you tried to skip town without paying boarding fees, took the horses when he confronted you." "Webb's lying, we paid every cent we owed. He tried to," Flora's voice caught. "He tried to force himself on me when I went to collect our horses. I fought him off and we left, that's the truth." "Got proof of payment?" It burned in the fire, everything we had burned. Hayes' expression remained neutral. Then it's your word against his, and he's got witnesses and a judge who signed this warrant. I'm going to have to take you back to Cheyenne for trial. No, Vance stepped between the marshal and the porch. You're not taking her anywhere. Mr. Thornton, I understand your instinct to protect her, but interfering with a lawman is a crime. So is false accusation. Webb's a known liar. Everyone in this territory knows his reputation. He's done this before, going after women who can't fight back. That may be, but I've got a legal warrant. My hands are tied. Vance's mind raced. If Flora went back to Cheyenne, she'd be at Webb's mercy. The man had money and influence, could buy a conviction easy. Flora could end up in prison or worse. She's my fiancée, Vance said suddenly. We're getting married. Hayes raised an eyebrow. That's convenient timing. It's the truth. We were planning the wedding for next month. Ask anyone in Silver Creek. Ask Samuel Reed, my foreman. He'll vouch for her character. Character's not the issue, the law is, but Hayes looked troubled. Though I'll admit, taking a man's fiancée, especially someone like you with your reputation, that's going to cause problems. Then don't do it. Wire Cheyenne, tell them Flora Simmons is accounted for and living respectably. Tell Webb if he wants to pursue this, he can come here himself and face me. The threat was implicit and clear. Hayes studied Vance for a long moment, then sighed. I'll send the wire, but Webb might call your bluff, and then I'll have no choice. The law's the law, even on the frontier. After the marshal and his men rode off, Flora rushed down the porch steps and into Vance's arms. She was trembling, whether from fear or relief, he couldn't tell. What if he comes back? She whispered. What if Webb actually shows up? Then I'll deal with him. He's not taking you. Vance, you can't fight the law, even for me. He pulled back to look at her face. Watch me. I'm not losing you to some lying coward's false accusations. We'll fight this together. Margaret joined them, her expression worried. If Webb does come, it'll be dangerous. Men like him don't forgive being challenged, especially by women they feel entitled to. Then it's a good thing Flora's not alone anymore, Vance said firmly. She's got me the ranch, every hand who works here. Webb wants a fight, he'll get one. But that night, lying in bed unable to sleep, Vance felt the old fear creeping back. He'd finally let himself love someone, and now the frontier was threatening to take her away. Maybe he'd been right all along. Maybe love was just a setup for devastating loss. No, he forced the thought away. Flora had taught him better. Love wasn't weakness, even when it made you vulnerable. It was worth fighting for, worth risking everything. He just hoped he was strong enough to protect her. 2 weeks passed with no word from Cheyenne. Vance stayed alert, keeping extra men on watch, making sure Flora was never alone when she left the ranch. The uncertainty wore on everyone, but Flora refused to hide or act like a fugitive. I didn't do anything wrong, she insisted. I won't act like I did. Her courage humbled Vance. While he'd spent years protecting himself from pain, Flora faced danger head-on, refusing to let fear dictate her life. In early November, the situation came to a head. Vance was working in the south pasture when a ranch hand came galloping up, his face urgent. Boss, riders coming, at least 8 men heavily armed, looks like trouble. Vance's heart sank. Get Flora and Margaret to the house. Tell Samuel to gather the men. By the time Vance reached the ranch yard, the riders were approaching. Marcus Webb was easy to identify, a heavy-set man in expensive clothes with mean, piggy eyes. The men with him looked like hired guns, not legitimate law. Webb, Vance called, positioning himself between the riders and the house. Behind him, Samuel and 6 ranch hands formed a line, all armed. This is private property. I'm here for Flora Simmons, got legal right to collect her for trial. Webb's voice was oily, satisfied. Marshal Hayes told me she was here. I've come to take what's mine. She's not yours, never was. She stole from me. That makes her mine until justice is done. The only theft here is you trying to steal her freedom with false charges. Webb's expression hardened. I've got a judge's warrant. You going to defy the law? I'm going to protect an innocent woman from a lying coward who assaults women and then hides behind bought witnesses. Careful with accusations, Thornton. Could land you in trouble. Could land you in the ground, you come one step closer. The tension ratcheted higher, both sides assessing each other. Webb's hired guns outnumbered Vance's men, but Vance had the home advantage. More importantly, he had everything to lose. "This doesn't need to get violent," Webb said, though his hand rested on his gun. "Just send out the girl." "That's not happening." "Then I'll take her by force." "You can try." Flora's voice cut through the standoff. "Stop, everyone, stop." She emerged from the house, Margaret trying to hold her back. Flora shook her off and walked straight toward the armed men, her chin high despite the fear Vance could see in her eyes. "Flora, get back," Vance ordered. "No, this is my fight." She stopped beside him, facing Webb directly. "You want me? Fine, but we both know the truth. You tried to assault me, I defended myself, and now you're using the law as revenge. How much did you pay those witnesses? How much did the judge cost?" Webb's face flushed. "You've got a wild imagination, girl." "Do I? Then let's go back to Cheyenne right now. Let me testify about what really happened. Let's see how your reputation holds up when everyone hears how Marcus Webb attacks women. You'd be the one on trial, not me." "Maybe, but the story would spread, people would talk, your business would suffer. Is that really worth it? Or would you rather just drop this and let me disappear from your life?" Webb's jaw worked, his eyes calculating. Vance could see him weighing reputation against revenge, pride against pragmatism. "You think you can negotiate," Webb finally said, "after stealing from me, humiliating me." "I didn't steal anything, and the only one who humiliated you was yourself." Flora's voice was steady, fearless. "But if it's compensation you want, I'll pay the boarding fees again. Double, that should be enough to satisfy any real debt." "It's not about money." "Then what? You want to see me punished for refusing you?" Flora took a step closer, her contempt clear. "You want to destroy my life because your pride was hurt. That's not justice, that's petty cruelty, and everyone here sees it." Webb looked around at the assembled men, at Vance's ranch hands watching with disgust, at his own hired guns who suddenly looked uncomfortable. Flora was right, taking her by force would make him look like the villain, would confirm every accusation she'd made. "You're not worth the trouble," Webb finally said, though his tone was furious. "Keep your stolen horses, keep your lies. But you better pray we never cross paths again." "We won't, I'm staying right here." Flora reached for Vance's hand. "With my husband." Webb's eyes widened. "You're what?" "We're married," Flora said, the lie smooth and confident. "Have been for a week. Ask anyone in Silver Creek. So unless you want to explain to a judge why you're harassing a married woman with false charges, I suggest you ride out." Webb stared at her, then at Vance, clearly trying to determine if it was true. Vance pulled Flora closer, claiming her in a way that left no doubt. "She's my wife, that makes your business my business, and I'm not nearly as patient as Flora." For a long moment, Webb looked like he might challenge them anyway. Then he spat in the dirt and yanked his horse around. "To hell with both of you. She's probably not worth the trouble anyway." He rode off with his men, leaving nothing but dust and fading hoofbeats. When they were out of sight, Flora's knees buckled. Vance caught her, holding her up as she shook with delayed reaction. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe now." "Did I really just do that?" "You did, you were incredible." He kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, her nose, finally her lips. "And you were right, we should be married. Not as a lie, but for real." Flora laughed shakily. "Is this another practical proposal?" "No, this is me saying I love you and want to spend my life with you. This is me saying you make me braver than I knew I could be. This is me asking if you'll marry me, for real, because I can't imagine my future without you in it." Tears streamed down Flora's face, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." They married a week later in the same church, where Vance had been left at the altar 2 months before. The symmetry wasn't lost on anyone, and if the gossips had plenty to say, Vance didn't care. Let them talk. He was marrying the woman he loved, the woman who'd taught him that survival wasn't enough, that life demanded more courage than simply enduring. Flora wore a simple white dress that Margaret had helped her make, with wildflowers in her blonde hair. She was beautiful, radiant, and when she said her vows, her voice was clear and certain. Vance's voice was less steady, choked with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I promise to love you, not just in the easy times, but through every hardship the frontier throws at us." I promise to be brave enough to feel, to open my heart even when it's scary. I promise to build a life with you, not just survive, but really live. I promise the same, Flora said, her blue eyes shining. And I promise to remind you every day that love isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing we have. When Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife, Vance kissed Flora with every ounce of love he'd spent years denying, and the congregation erupted in cheers. The reception was held at the ranch, with half the county in attendance. Even Samuel got misty-eyed during the toasts, declaring that he'd never seen Vance this happy. "You found a good one, boss," he said, clapping Vance on the shoulder. "Don't mess it up." "I won't. She won't let me." That night, alone in the house that finally felt like a home, Vance and Flora stood on the porch watching the stars. Margaret had moved into the foreman's cottage, giving them privacy, and the future stretched ahead full of possibility. "What are you thinking?" Flora asked, leaning into his warmth. "That I was wrong about everything, about love, about strength, about what matters." "You were scared, that's not wrong, it's human." "I'm still scared sometimes. Afraid something will happen to you, that I'll lose this." "You will lose it eventually. Death comes for everyone on the frontier." Flora looked up at him, her expression serious but unafraid. "But that's no reason not to love fiercely while we can. My parents had 20 years together and they lived every day fully. That's what I want for us, not perfect safety, but real life." Vance kissed her temple. "How'd you get so wise at 20? "Same way you got so stubborn at 25, life lessons." They laughed together, and Vance marveled at how natural this felt, how right. He'd spent years believing that emotional isolation was strength, that the frontier demanded solitude. Flora had shown him the truth, that love was the bravest thing anyone could choose, that building a life together was harder and more rewarding than building one alone. "I love you," he said, because the words no longer felt dangerous. They felt like truth, simple and profound. "I love you too." As winter settled over Montana, Vance and Flora built their life together. They worked the ranch side by side, laughing through challenges and celebrating victories. They sat on the porch every evening watching sunsets, honoring the memory of Vance's mother and the beauty she'd believed in. They talked late into the night about their dreams, their fears, their plans for the ranch and the family they hoped to build. In February, Flora announced she was pregnant. Vance felt the old fear surge briefly, worry about all the things that could go wrong, but Flora's joy was infectious. "Don't be scared," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "Be excited. We're creating a life, Vance. That's what all this work, all this struggle is for, not just survival, but the next generation. Hope for the future." He was excited, he realized. More than that, he was grateful. Grateful that Caroline had left him at the altar because it had opened the door for Flora to enter his life. Grateful for the fire that had brought her to his ranch. Grateful for every moment of fear and doubt that had led to this point. Their daughter was born in October, exactly 1 year after Marshal Hayes had arrived with the warrant. They named her Rose after Vance's mother, and when Vance held her for the first time, he wept openly. "You're allowed to cry," Flora said from the bed, tired but glowing. "She's perfect." "She is." "You both are." And in that moment, holding his daughter while his wife watched with love in her eyes, Vance understood what his mother had known all along. That beauty was as important as productivity. That love was worth the risk. That opening your heart was the bravest thing anyone could do. The frontier was still harsh. Montana winters were brutal, cattle still died, and danger was never far away. But Vance faced it all differently now, not alone but with Flora by his side, with their daughter sleeping peacefully in the nursery, with a home full of life and love. He'd thought the ranch was all he needed. He'd been wrong. The ranch was just land and cattle without someone to share it with, without the laughter and tears and daily mundane joys that made survival into living. Flora had taught him that. She'd challenged every false belief he'd clung to, had shown him that strength came in many forms, that vulnerability and courage were two sides of the same coin. And she'd loved him despite his stubbornness, his fear, his years of emotional isolation. She'd loved him into becoming the man he'd always been capable of being. 10 years later, the Thornton Ranch was the most successful in 3 counties, but Vance measured success differently now. It wasn't just in the size of his herd or the quality of his land. It was in the 3 children who ran through the house laughing, in the wife who still challenged him and loved him in equal measure. In the life they'd built together, full of love and struggle and beauty. He still thought of that day at the altar, when Caroline had left him alone and humiliated. It had seemed like the worst moment of his life, a confirmation of every fear he'd carried. Instead, it had been a gift, an unexpected mercy that had opened the door for real love, for Flora, for everything that mattered. On their 10th anniversary, Vance and Flora stood on the porch at sunset, watching their children play in the yard while Margaret supervised from her rocking chair. The scene was peaceful, domestic, exactly the kind of life Vance had once thought impossible. "Happy anniversary," Flora said, her hand in his. "Best 10 years of my life. Even though I'm stubborn and impossible." Especially because of that, he pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not accepting my terrible proposal, for demanding more than practical, for teaching me how to live instead of just survive." Flora smiled up at him, the same smile that had captured his heart a decade before. "You're welcome. Though I think you taught me just as much, how to be strong without being hard, how to protect without closing off, how to build something lasting." "We did it together." "Yes, we did." As the sun set over the Montana plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Vance Thornton held his wife and watched his children play, and knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. The frontier had tried to teach him that love was weakness, that isolation was strength, that survival was all that mattered. Flora had taught him the truth, that love was the point of surviving, that strength meant opening your heart, that building a life together was the greatest adventure of all. And he would spend the rest of his days grateful for the woman who'd rejected his practical proposal and demanded his heart instead.